In our first symposium, Do Not Be Contaminated By, we are going to consider 3 areas that could be a problem for us in being no part of the world. We need to consider the contaminating parts of the world that could put pressure on us to become like it. These contaminants will be addressed in a 3-part symposium, helping us to see the dangers that are sidetracking the world today and could cause God's people some problems too. The symposium is entitled, Do Not Be Contaminated By. Brother Dale Fielder, serving in the Tarpon Springs congregation, Brother Tony Christodoulou, serving in the East Largo congregation, Brother Nick Kasoyanis, serving in the East Holiday congregation, will present this information for us. Brother Fielders will consider the first part entitled, The Wild Beast. Brother Fielders, please.
Just imagine, if you will, it's Sunday, it's a beautiful day, and you're driving either to your meeting or you're meeting for field service. You know, you always see all these people in the intersection selling newspapers. And usually they're just yelling out what newspaper they're selling. But this particular Sunday, they're not just yelling out the newspaper, but they're holding it up and they're shouting out this front page headline that says, Community Warned of Contamination Threats. Now think for a moment, if you heard that, how would you feel? Wouldn't you immediately consider what you needed to do to make sure that you and your family were safe? Well, without question, of course you would. Well, in effect, such a warning has been indeed issued. The writer of the book of Revelation conveyed a similar warning and information. Our publications have long indicated, yes, repeatedly, 3 principal facets of this world. For millenniums, these elements have been involved and have been constant in every ruling system. As Christians, from a thorough and diligent study of God's Word, we've come to appreciate how each of these aspects is used by Satan to contaminate the minds of the world. In fact, at 2 Corinthians 4:4, we have appreciated that he's actually blinded their minds. However, this symposium this afternoon will expose subtle ways in which these elements threaten us and how we need to be aware of them. The first potential contamination is identified as the wild beast. If you'll take your Bibles, please, notice how that wild beast is described in the 13th chapter of Revelation. And you may want to keep your Bibles open to that chapter. That's Revelation 13. And we're going to read verses 1 and 2. Revelation 13, and beginning in verse 1, it says, And it stood still upon the sand of the sea. And I saw a wild beast ascending out of the sea with 10 horns and 7 heads, and upon its horns 10 diadems, but upon its heads blasphemous names. Now the wild beast that I saw was like a leopard, but its feet were as those of a bear, and its mouth was as a lion's mouth. And the dragon gave to the wild beast its power and its throne and great authority. What we've had described here is a beast that has 7 heads and 10 horns. Think for a moment. If you knew that kind of beast, that freakish beast was loose in your community, don't you think for a moment that you'd be vigilant, that you would be alert to make sure you were not anywhere near that beast? I don't think there's any question that all of us would agree to that. Yet what about this symbolic wild beast? Well, first of all, what is it? The book of Daniel can help us with this. Daniel had a similar vision that he beheld 4 beasts whose features and characteristics were very similar to the one that we just read of here in Revelation. At Daniel 7, verses 17 and 23, Daniel was to help to see that these beasts represented kings or political powers. It's interesting that the remnants of those 4 ancient empires that Daniel saw still exist today. They exist in the fact that they're included or are absorbed in actual nations today. These, in turn, form one grotesque beast, complete with 10 horns, 10 signifying completeness in a physical sense as to things on earth. But it's another number that it's recognized as well. Please notice what that number is by going to the 18th verse in Revelation 13. Revelation 13 and verse 18, it says, Here is where wisdom comes in. Let the one that has intelligence calculate the number of the wild beast, for it is a man's number, and its number is 613. and 66. Since this wild beast is named with a man's number, this really confirms that this beast is relegated as something that's earthly. By putting these identifying marks together, we come to appreciate that this wild beast represents the gigantic worldwide political system of Satan, and it's represented by the name number of 666. It's a ravenous, destructive, frightful, and brute beast. And it has absolutely no love for the Christian congregation. Notice what it brings out to the extent of how angry this beast is if you turn to Revelation 13 and notice verse 7. It says, "And there was granted it to wage war with the holy ones and to conquer them. And the authority was given it over every tribe and people and tongue and nation." It was to wage war. That's how angry it is. And yet, why is it so angry with Jehovah's people? Well, the reason it focuses on Jehovah's people is because it already has the rest of the world under its control. So it's focusing on those it doesn't have. Notice the control it has by looking at verses 16 and 17 of Revelation 13. Beginning in verse 16, it says, "And it put under compulsion all persons, the small and the great, and the rich and the poor, and the free and the slaves, that they should give these a mark in their right hand and upon their forehead, and that nobody might be able to buy or sell except a person having the mark, the name of the wild beast, or the number of its name." Yes, most on earth today have been coerced into being marked, or branded as if it were, to be owned already by this wild beast, and they actively support it. Yet now, what about us? As true Christians, we accept our Christian duty to be respectful of the governments that we live under. We obey the laws of the land, and by doing so, we make a positive contribution to the welfare of our community and those of our neighbors. However, we need to be warned that we must be careful not to accept the mark of the wild beast. What does it mean to be marked in one's hand or the forehead? Well, since the hand represents our action and our forehead represents our thinking ability, accepting such a mark would actually mean that it would indicate that someone or something has control of us. It's not uncommon even today for individuals to get specific tattoos that identify them with a certain organization, a gang, and a fraternity, or some other group. It's an identification mark. And you know those people of the world in those situations are very proud of that. They make sure that tattoo is very prominent. And what's more prominent than a tattoo right in your forehead or something that's on your hand? That's what the mark of the wild beast is. It's recognizable. The Bible, as well as secular history, prove that our early Christian brothers would rather have died than to accept this mark, even if it meant something as simple as offering a little pinch of incense to the emperor. They recognized that as a mark of that wild beast, and they refused to be marked in such a way and would offer no support whatsoever. Yet how might we as Christians today become contaminated by the mark of the wild beast? Well, we might illustrate it this way. It takes a very little mold. In fact, in some cases, only a few spores to contaminate a larger area. Then, in the case of mold contamination, it usually grows behind the scene, as it were, in a hidden area, and it just continues to grow and grow until some point in time it's contaminated a complete area. And if we're talking about a house, to the point that in many cases that house could be uninhabited. So, we want to be able to look at areas in our lives that may be minor, or areas we don't even really think about as areas of contamination. Let's consider 4 areas that we can reflect on personally, and from a self-analysis, see if we might be allowing any sort of contamination to establish itself with regards to the wild beast. Now, our first area is, as Jehovah's people, we've chosen to obey the principles set forth at Isaiah 2:4 regarding learning war no more. As such, we do not take arms or physically take part in any military organization, action, or campaign. We stay completely out of that, and we're known for that. Yet, is it possible that our thinking has been subtly tainted How so? Well, if we find ourselves when a conversation of others around us is taking place and they're talking about events in the world, could we find ourselves getting involved in a conversation using expressions such as our side, our troops, our president? Would anybody hearing us make such expressions think that we were neutral in such matters? Recall what Jesus said at Matthew 12, verse 34. He says, out of the abundance of the heart, the mouth speaks. So obviously, if we're using these terms, it's something we've allowed inside of us to be able to make those comments. And if that were true, then we would want to quickly remove that contamination before it could spread, before it actually becomes something we vocalize readily. Our second area involves being no part of this world and its politics. Jesus set the example for this for his followers when he told Pilate that his kingdom was no part of the world, nor were his followers. We follow that example by not taking part in actually voting for any political candidate or belonging to any political parties, no matter what land we live in. However, again, think about this. Our hand may not physically be voting for a candidate, casting a ballot as it were, but what about our thinking? What about our voices? Again, the conversation takes place around us, say during election time. It's not uncommon for candidates or the conversation to get on these different candidates and their plans of whatever they are. If we're not careful, what might we find ourselves doing? Might we not be voicing an opinion on a specific candidate as having a better plan than the other one, or showing a preference to a specific political party over another one? Once again, would anybody listening be able to say that we were neutral as regards to the world politics? Or if you've ever caught yourself saying, well, if it wasn't for the truth, I'd probably vote for so-and-so. Or I'd belong to such and such a party. What does that mean? Our thinking is going down the wrong way, friends. We don't want to think of, well, if I wasn't in the truth, we are in the truth. We're Jehovah's servants, and we want to have no part of that contamination. So be quick to wash it away, to have no contamination of this wild beast. Our third area involves our youth, those that are in school. Our children do a remarkable thing, and they are to be praised for it. When they take a stand as being different, it's not easy. It's difficult to be under all that peer pressure. And yet they respectfully refuse to salute any national item in any country, and we know that makes them stand out amongst their peers. But we also know and commend you, young ones, because it makes Jehovah's heart glad. And that's important. That's the most important thing. But you, dear young ones, need to be careful too, because in schools they have the school elections, school officers, student council. And if you're not careful, just like the adults, you could let your thinking, you may not get involved in the actual voting, but you could be thinking, well, I like John better or Susie better or whoever because they're a friend of mine, and you may vocalize that. So others around may think, well, you're part of this whole thing. And we don't want that to happen to you. So please make sure that you're looking at your thought pattern. Talk it over with your parents. Make it a matter of prayer. Our fourth area is an interesting one. When you're analyzing yourself, you have to be really honest with yourself to see what our true feelings are on this one. And it involves sports teams, especially those from another land, when they're competing in an international competition. How do you feel? Is it possible that we're passionately and pridefully siding inwardly or outwardly with our country's team, or even my country's team? What if it's simply just a better team? There's nothing wrong in watching a team and knowing they're better players. There's no nationalism in that. But if we're pridefully believing one country is better in all things, would that not say that nationalism is moving us to that passion, to identify with one side or another? It's easy to let that happen if we're not careful. Again, for it to come out of our mouths, it has to be somewhere within our thought pattern already. Let's look in on a demonstration wherein we see two brothers discussing an upcoming international sporting event and see if you can picture yourself in a similar situation.
Hey, Tommy, World Cup's coming up. What do you think?
Oh, this World Cup, my country's team will win hands down. Have you seen how we've been playing? You can't stop us.
Sure, can't stop you from losing.
What?
I know my country's team is going to be coming home with the gold.
No, my culture is the best at, you name it.
Wait. I shouldn't have said that.
That's right.
Nope. we're getting really heated about this. I mean, do you realize what we've been saying?
What?
We're saying that our teams are better because of national origins and not because of player skill. I mean, it's really patriotic.
Oh, come on. You know I didn't mean it that way.
No, seriously think about what we've been saying. I mean, there's even a scripture that comes to mind, James 4:4, where it says that anybody making themselves a friend of the world is constituting themselves an enemy of God. And even the Apostle John brings out how serious it is, saying that the whole world is lying in the power of the wicked one.
Okay. I see what you mean. Satan is the ruler of this world. We need to be careful when we side with a country's team. It's really easy to become proud without even realizing it, right? Inwardly, we could believe that one country is better than another. And if we side with a country, whose control are we putting ourselves under?
Yeah, and if we really think about it, the early Christians, they would never engage in prideful patriotic worship to any part of the wild beast, because they know that would mean that they're worshiping Satan the devil, who we know who controls this world.
Just like we learned at the assembly. We should be careful not to be proud of any part of Satan's world if we want to be loyal to God's kingdom.
Yeah. You know what? I'm going to watch the World Cup, but just to enjoy it. I mean, it is just a game.
It's not about the best country.
Right.
Hey, may the best team win.
Thank you, brothers, for that animated demonstration. This wild beast, like any literal wild beast, is a predator. And as long as it's alive, it is going to hunt down and stalk prey. Yes, it will continue to be a threat to everyone, but it'll continue to be focused on Jehovah's people. In time, it won't be here. In fact, in the near future, notice what the outcome of the wild beast is going to be by turning over to the 19th chapter of Revelation and read verse 20. Revelation 19 and verse 20 says, "And the wild beast was caught, and along with it the false prophet that performed in front of it the signs with which he misled those who received the mark of the wild beast and those who render worship to its image. While still alive, they were both hurled into the fiery lake that burns with sulfur." That time is nearing us very, very soon. Soon the headlines are going to be shouted, not that the wild beast is loose, but instead the wild beast is caught and destroyed. That day is rapidly approaching. So my friends, be determined. Be determined to be no part of this world. Be determined not to be tainted in any way by this wild beast. And yes, may you be determined to resist any contamination of your Christian neutrality. In the meantime, there is another threat to our Christian community. The second newsworthy event from the book of Revelation is, do not be contaminated by the great harlot. It will be voted on by Brother Antonis Christodoulou.
Wasn't it exciting to review the newsworthy identity of this wild beast, friends, and its need to avoid its contamination? Now, may I ask you to do this, please? Think of this. You come home, you pick up the local newspaper, and your eyes instantly catch the headline news. Warning, residents, a massive prostitution ring is operating and is supported either directly or indirectly by the political leaders in your community. Would that not shock you and at the same time raise some serious concerns? Let's look into this warning, but we're not going to look at a local newspaper. We're going to look at God's Word, the Bible. Turn with me to Revelation chapter 17, and we're going to examine verses 1 and 2. That's Revelation 17, 1 and 2. Here's the report. And one of the 7 angels that had the 7 bowls came and spoke with me, John that is, saying, "Come, I will show you the judgment upon the great harlot who sits on many waters, with whom the kings of the earth commit fornication, whereas those who inhabit the earth were made drunk with the wine of her fornication." Now, these are some graphic descriptions or language that we read here, friends. And we know that this is symbolism. So the logical question is this. Who is represented by the great harlot? And you notice her activity involves the entire earth that she makes drunk with the wine of her fornication. So it's within our residence area, our community, that her influence is there, and that we need to avoid it and not be contaminated by her so as to remain no part of this world. Now, who is she? Well, to help us deduce as to who really this one is, we have several clues in the Bible. We've already examined that the kings of the earth, representing the political rulers, it cannot be a world political organization. After this part, we're going to examine the merchants, or the traveling merchants, so hence she cannot be a commercial entity. Who is this, then, great harlot represented here? Well, the Bible helps us to identify her by another strong clue in Revelation chapter 18 and verse 23. Revelation 18:23. Now, as you look at that verse, there are specific references to her identity, linking to her identity, referring to lamps, referring to bride and bridegroom, but it also refers to another expression, spiritistic practices. Now that comes from the Greek word pharmagia, which if you look into some other translations, it has to do with potions, sorcery. Yes, it identifies this great harlot as having things having to do with religious nature. Now, we know that the Revelation 17 refers to her influence as not just a local area, but the entire inhabited earth. So her identity has to be an organization that is of global, massive influence and organization. Yes, this is none other than the entire world empire of false religion. She is the harlot. Now, we might ask, friends, this. Why does Jehovah refer to the world empire of false religion as a great harlot? Well, turn with me. Let's allow him to answer that in James chapter 4 and verse 4. Let's go to James chapter 4 and verse 4. And please note the very first expression or word used in that verse. James 4:4 says, adulteresses. Now that has to do with immoral conduct and reference. Do you not know that the friendship with the world is enmity with God? Whoever therefore wants to be a friend of the world is constituting himself an enemy of God. Yes, we know for a fact that the world empire of false religion has been meddling for centuries in politics. Therefore, clearly identifying her as a spiritual harlot. Also, Revelation 17:6 and Revelation 19:2 show her by her hateful, murderous actions toward those who want to serve Jehovah, make her an enemy of Jehovah and true worship. Hence, for these and many other reasons, Revelation 17:5 identifies her as someone disgusting, as a harlot. Friends, do we not view her also as disgusting? Thank you. She deserves that, friends. But you know, although we use Jehovah's word to refute her many false doctrines, such as the hellfire, Trinity, and so forth, we really have to ask this question. Are we fully aware of the extent of her influence of people's thinking and behavior so as not to be contaminated by her in any way? It's not always easy, friends, to see the subtle ways that she can influence ones and to the extent of such an influence. Yet these subtle ways can have a tremendous effect on people's thinking and acting. You see, Satan is the ruler of this world. He has designed it in such a way that all of his parts, political, religious, and commercial, exert constant pressure to shape and influence our thinking and actions. It takes a conscious effort to, as Paul put it in Romans 12:2, to quit being fashioned, molded, shaped after the system of things. Or as another translation puts it, do not let the world around you squeeze you into its own mold. Now, even today, interestingly, even today, experts know the effect of such subtle but yet constant influence and pressure that it has on others, particularly in the advertising field. This one investigative journalist, Eric Clark, in his book, The Want Makers, says this, and I quote, "The more we are bombarded by advertising, the less we notice it, and yet the more we are affected." Now, another advertising agent put it this way: there are two ways to influence customers. One is to seduce them. Two is to condition them. Do we not agree that Satan, through Babylon's influence, has as his aim to seduce and condition our thinking to reflect his and show it about our behavior and our attitude? However, because we worship Jehovah, along with the chaste, bride class of anointed ones, friends, it is very important that we recognize this: that Babylon's influences reach far beyond her false doctrines and places of worship. And we need to stay clear of any contamination by her in order to remain free from being part of this world. Now, what are some of the areas that are subtle yet dangerous for us and we need to avoid? We will discuss three areas in our part. One, regarding customs and celebrations. Two, regarding moral standards. And three, regarding a proper view of our ministry. Now let's talk about customs and celebrations. First of all, we want to set the record clear. Jehovah's Witnesses are not against all customs and celebrations. But we do know for a fact that false religion plays a major role in promoting popular holidays and their spirit. And such holidays, we find, are steeped in pagan and God-dishonoring customs and celebrations. And their spirit is offensive to our God Jehovah. Now, would you not agree that as we examine these holidays, we find that they all seem to have a common theme? One, they appeal to fleshly desires, and two, they promote some false religious practice or spiritism. Let's talk about a specific area that we need to exercise extreme caution, and that is in the area of celebrating weddings. Now, although we know that customs can vary from country to country, some may appear to be innocent fun, but may have their roots in pagan practices. Now, one such practice that most of us recognize as being pagan is that of throwing rice. Yet we know for a fact that such action has been taken to appease the spirits so as not to harm the couple. However, we would also want to be careful not to be influenced by the spirit behind this practice and to be fooled that instead of throwing rice, we would use a substitute. Now, one could falsely reason that way, couldn't we? And yet we know what that represents, friends. This is something serious that we need to look at as Jehovah looks at it. According to 2 Corinthians 6, verses 14 through 16, there Paul helps us to appreciate that there is nothing that the demons teach and Jehovah teaches that can actually be merged together. Now, another celebration that we need to be careful of, and the spirit behind it, that the world really does in a big way, is the matter of celebrating birthdays. Now, the spirit behind such is in part of self-importance or self-exaltation. We want nothing to do with that kind of spirit. We know who seeks that, and no doubt why it is only second to Halloween as a celebration for Satan worshipers. Friends, we in turn want to direct all the glory to Jehovah our God, not to any human. So we need to be careful in those areas. Now let's pick up the second point. The second area we need to be careful. And that is Babylon's corrupting influence on moral standards. History bears out that false religion has been at least guilty of condoning the immoral conduct of its members and clergy. And as of late, we know it's much more than that. Now this corrupting influence, this immoral corrupting influence, is one of the lures Satan uses to corrupt the minds of people and catch them as his prey. Interestingly, the same lure he used when God's people were on the threshold of the promised land. Take a trip with me for a moment to that threshold. Can we see the Israelites? Finally, after decades, they can finally see the homes that they would occupy. They can finally see the fields that they would cultivate. They can see the food that they would eat. They can see the animals that they would care for with their own eyes. Yet that night, Satan pulled out his brightest and shiniest lure, friends, the seductive Moabite and Midianite women, and their subtle yet degrading immoral influence. It cost 24,000 of God's people's lives that evening on the border of God's promised land. What a massive, monumental tragedy. Friends, we are on the threshold of Jehovah's promised new world. With our eyes of faith, we can see the houses that we would occupy. We can see the paradise earth that we would live in. We can see the fields that we would cultivate, the animals we would care for, and the resurrected ones that we will welcome back. But the master deceiver is pulling out his best, his brightest, his shiniest lure to this date. This time the Midianite and Moabites are coming not only in the flesh and blood, but also in pictures, movies, digital media, sexting, and whatever else he can come up with before he's abyssed. And this time, these Midianite and Moabites are pouring in, not by the thousands, millions, but by the billions into the area that Jehovah's people are camped, awaiting the deliverance into the promised new world. Sadly, this great harlot has been a major instrument by which Satan uses to weaken people's moral fibers. Therefore, we must be careful not to adopt the tolerant, permissive thinking of Babylon's teachers at such a late hour. Jehovah's moral standards found in the Bible must not be watered down to conform to popular lifestyles. Friends, we know Jehovah's laws don't change. Hence, we must resist Satan's seductive and subtle influence through the permissive spirit that the great harlot is promoting today. We must do this in order to stay free from any contamination and be no part of the world. Now let's take up our third area to be careful in, and that is Babylon's influence in the area of the proper view of our ministry. Now, I don't know about you, but I found this particular interest to me, this area. Why? Well, you see, Babylon has had a great influence on people's thinking in this area. False religion has been ridiculing our house-to-house ministry as unnecessary and primitive. Now, why do you think she's interested in wanting us to have that mental attitude? Because she has seen firsthand the effectiveness of this work, and how many millions have been freed from her disgusting influence. Her way is that she would like us to adopt, let the people come to our places of worship. She does not reach out to people to help them, just as Jesus did, because this requires humility, and she does not have, nor will she ever have that. Never will we want to allow her subtle influence in this area to weaken our zeal and conviction about our ministry. Sadly, friends, the effect of such a way of thinking is seen today. How? By how many go to a brief religious service, perhaps let's say Sunday for 30 minutes, and then off they go into a self-indulging way of life, such as perhaps spending excessive amount of time on recreation. Now, friends, let's do some self-analysis. Are we in danger of slipping into a similar pattern of life? Or are the theocratic activities what we live for? Our way of thinking should be influenced by what Jehovah says at 1 Timothy 4:8 regarding to godly devotion as being far superior to physical activities. Our theocratic activities must take first place in our lives. These are the things that make us truly happy, and we have a bright future with that. One subtle way in which false religion has influenced people is the little regard for their appearance when they attend their places of worship. And wouldn't you not agree with me that this speaks volumes of what they actually think of their God? However, We would never want to reflect such a casual view of our worship and respect to our God Jehovah. We must at all times reflect a dignified, reverent attitude toward our places of worship. We want to look our best and be modestly dressed, as well as displaying good taste. One thing is clear, friends. When it comes to exclusive devotion to our God Jehovah, it truly includes keeping ourselves clean, dignified, reverent in our places of worship. Now, if you would, please turn your attention to our demonstration. The setting is an elder and his family have invited a young brother to join them for dinner after the district convention is over. Our demonstration, please.
This district convention is really great so far.
It really has been. I really enjoyed that last part.
Yeah, I really enjoyed that last illustration about the apple pies that the district overseer used. Mm-hmm. And didn't Wesley say that he'd be joining us for dinner tonight?
Yes, he did. He did say that. Ah, Wesley, you are still joining us for dinner, aren't you?
Yes. And then after that, I was going to go meet up with a couple of other brothers from the hall.
Great. You know, Tammy, I remember seeing Brother and Sister Smith in the lobby as we passed by just now. Mm-hmm. Why don't you and Devin go see if they'd like to join us for dinner as well?
That's a good idea. We'll be right back.
You know, Wesley, I really want to thank you for the good example that you're setting in the congregation. My son Devin really looks up to you, and at his age, examples of ones like yours really has an effect on him. I really appreciate the good example you're setting for my son.
Well, thank you, Brother Hernandez. I do love Jehovah, and I try to serve him in any way I can.
I know you do. You know, we're very well aware of the fact that our appearance reflects on Jehovah's name. But never is that more true than when we're attending events directly connected with our worship, like when we're out in the ministry, attending meetings, visiting Bethel, or attending our district convention. By wearing our meeting clothes to dinner, it gives us an opportunity to give a good witness. Have you ever driven by a church on a Sunday morning and seen how they dress?
Yeah, they seem to dress very casually.
Yeah, would you say they dress more like I'm dressed right now or more like you're dressed right now?
Well, I guess more like me. But I've got my convention badge on. So.
I did notice that, and that is very good. However, imagine a police officer coming to your door dressed like you are right now, wearing shorts and sandals, but on his chest he's wearing his badge. What impression would you get about how that police officer feels about his role on the police force?
Well, he would be showing disrespect for it.
Exactly. In this city, they're used to seeing Jehovah's Witnesses every weekend, for weeks on end, wearing these badges. And if they see you dressed like that, they would get the same impression that you would of that police officer. By wearing our meeting clothes, we make a distinction between us and most churchgoers. Really, we should wear our meeting clothes anytime the public will see us for the few days that we're here in the convention city.
You know, you're right, Brother Hernandez. I just never thought of it that way before. Hey, I'm going to go back up to my room to change. I'll be right back.
And we'll be waiting for you in the lobby.
Okay.
Friends, there are many aspects of remaining untainted by the great harlot. We've only just mentioned 3 areas. 1, the avoiding of her God-dishonoring customs and practices. 2, not succumbing to her moral degradation. And 3, keeping a proper view of our ministry, including our appearances. Now, this may sound like a lot too much to do for some, but our desire to please our God Jehovah is a strong incentive to keep away from Babylonish influence. But you know what? We have another strong incentive to stay away from her influence. Turn with me to Revelation chapter 18, and this time we'll consider verse 4. That's Revelation 18:4, and notice the incentive. And I heard another voice out of heaven say, "Get out of her, my people, if you do not want to share with her in her sins, and if you do not want to receive part of her plagues." That incentive is very clear, isn't it? The voice from heaven says, "Get out of her, my people. Have nothing to do with her if you don't want any parts of her plagues." Now that's pretty obvious, isn't it, friends? Who of us wants any part of her plagues or her punishment? She could have it all to herself and those who support her. Therefore, the political and religious elements are two of the areas that we so far have learned and that need to avoid any contamination by their influence and actions. But the book of Revelation is not finished with that. There's one more area that we need to pay attention to stay clear from any contamination so as to be no part of the world. Now please give your attention to Brother Nick Gutsoyanis as he highlights the third element that is stalking our Christian community today. His theme is do not be contaminated by the traveling merchants.
A family in India living in the shacks sends their 8-year-old daughter to work while they work really hard. And all of this simply just to provide food on a table. A family in the United States that lived in a beautiful big luxury home, had luxury automobiles, the latest of electronics, the best of furniture, are just being evicted from their house and going into government-subsidized homes. What do these two families, a world apart, have in common? Both of them have been victimized by the same source, as we will see. As sobering truth is stated at 1 John 5:19, when the Bible there helps us to appreciate that Satan is the ruler of this world. Yes, Satan indeed controls all the world, and as part of his control, he also controls a greedy and oppressive commercial system that's referred to in Revelation 18:11 as the traveling merchants. Just imagine another article in the front page of your newspaper entitled, "Scam Artists Victimize Millions." Yes, that happens daily, friends, across the world. The commercial system exploits the common people's endeavors and seeks to keep them in economic bondage. Why, a couple of generations back, you could go back to your father and grandfather and they had a bank account with a bank savings and they had a certain amount of thousands of dollars in the account. Well, the new generation does too, but that's in debt. Up to here, they say, with the credit cards, right? So really then, this oppressive commercial system or the traveling merchants, they seek to keep people in economic bondage, just as Babylon the Great tries to people in spiritual bondage and trying to induce fear into them so that they could even take whatever money thinking they're going to buy favor with God. And then the political element, on the other hand, keeps the people in political bondage. Every politician promising them freedom, lower taxes, and in the end, people are left with a slogan, born free and taxed to death. And so that's what we have in the devil's system of things. To give you an example of the traveling merchants and their actions, in poverty-stricken countries, laborers, like the young girl that I mentioned, work for pennies a day to produce the goods that will enrich the greedy companies who exploit them. Yes, that family in India, I've personally seen the documentary in the eyes of the little girl that worked in a factory. Not by choice, but because the same company, instead of rewarding their employees, they pay them pennies while their executives live in beautiful mansion homes and yachts and airplanes and expensive golf courses. Yes, exploitation. What about tobacco companies? They market a lethal product for great profits, and in recent years, they've raised the nicotine levels. Why? So they can get the people more addictive. For what reason? More lucrative, more profit. Yes. Big business cares about only one thing, and only one thing, friends, make no mistake, what they call the bottom line. What's the bottom line? Profit. Everything is for profit. And this will be evident when false religion is destroyed. If you ever had the opportunity to visit Europe and see some of the ancient things there, you will see these huge cathedrals everywhere, with gold and silver ornaments, ivory, marble, expensive stained glass. Yes, over the years, the traveling merchants, along with religion, they've enriched themselves, and Babylon the Great has. But notice in Revelation, the 18th chapter, friends, if you'd like to turn there to Revelation 18, we'll read verse 15 on, and see here again the motive of the traveling merchants. At Revelation 18, verse 15, we read, "The traveling merchants of these things who became rich from her will stand at a distance because of their fear of her torment, and will weep and mourn, saying, too bad, the great city, clothed with fine linen and purple and scarlet and richly adorned with gold ornament and precious stone and pearl." Why? Because in 1 hour such great riches have been devastated. Yes, the traveling merchants, big business, cares about only one thing. Their motives are shown, not because of their fondness of religion that goes down, but because such great riches have been devastated. The traveling merchants' disregard for creation is seen in the worldwide pollution. And if laws are set for that, they move to the next land where no laws are set. And in some cities you need to wear a mask to be able to walk. All of that just for profit. And as Revelation 11:18 said, they are ruining the earth. Just think of the recent oil spill, for example. Some of you wonder where all that oil went. The marine biologist that I visited said to me it's all at the bottom of the Gulf. Yes, friends, it takes strong effort for us, however, not to be contaminated by the traveling merchants. Well, how can we be contaminated and why? Each year, billions of dollars are spent on advertising. For what reason? They are designed to make us unhappy with what we have and desirous of the things we do not have or need. Just coming here today, did you notice the signs on the highway, on every small road, advertisement everywhere? If you go open the internet, advertisement on the side. You go get your mail out of the mailbox, envelopes full of advertisement. You go to have your dinner and the telemarketer's call. Oh, you've won, congratulations. You get a check in the mail, you look at it, it looks real. Oh, mine, I got all the money. But you read the fine print, which you need a bifocal to do. By signing this check, you are agreeing to a 2-year term about the monthly fee of. Do you think they care about you, friends? Only one thing, profit. So are we happy with what we have? Notice the point here, friends. It says we're surrounded by people whose thinking has been molded by the traveling merchants. They unwittingly slave for more and more things in order to bring them happiness, of course. But this will not bring them happiness. The second family I mentioned in the United States that had a beautiful home and automobiles and electronics and furniture, they used to have a modest home. And they had a car, they got along fine. But all this boom in the last 10 years, for example, and everybody, oh, you deserve it, you get the best. They had a good job, so they bought all these big things, but guess what? They were laid off and they lost their jobs. And all the promise of happiness of material possessions, they were all repossessed, the house foreclosed, and they're walking into a government project to live. Is that far-fetched? No, that's by the thousands. United States and Europe and the developed world. And sad to say, it may have bitten a few of our brothers. We need to be careful because, as it says, we're surrounded by that. See, the second family, it was self-inflicted. The traveling merchants were the cause, but it was self-inflicted. So we need to be very careful, friends. We need to ask a couple of questions. Here is one of them. Do we borrow money or use credit cards to buy non-essentials because we desire them, not reflecting whether we can pay the debt when due? It's like plastic anesthesia. You know, when they take you for an operation, they give you an anesthesia and you feel, You go to sleep, nothing, right? You swipe that card, you buy that beautiful dress, that nice suit, that Gucci bag, and you go home and you show it off and you feel good. 30 days later, the bill comes. Oh my God, I didn't charge that. Oh, yes, you did, honey. So, friends, every time we swipe it, and I do too for necessities, we're taking out a loan be sure that you can pay that loan and don't become a slave to the traveling merchants. Do we see our brothers, if we have business, as potential customers for our advantage? We need to be very careful. We need to be very careful, brothers, because we can easily adopt the world's attitude. And when it comes to finances, be very careful, because Proverbs 22:7 says that the borrower becomes a slave to the lender. And that's why half of the world is up to here with debt. We really need to occupy ourselves with what is important, friends. You see, Jesus made it clear that we cannot slave for two masters. No, he said, you cannot do that. But rather, he said what we should do here in Luke chapter 12. And if you'd like to turn to Luke 12, here is what he said about material possessions. In Luke chapter 12 and in verse 15, Jesus says there in verse 15, he said to them, keep your eyes open and guard against every sort of covetousness, because even when a person has an abundance, his life does not result from the things he possesses. And isn't it true that many of us, prior to learning the truth, we used to think that happiness will come by having more and better and bigger? We did. By learning the truth, what a blessing. We have with us, would like to interview Brother and Sister Tillerman from the Tarpon Springs English congregation. And we'll ask them a few questions. First, we'll start with Sister Tillerman. Sister Tillerman, can you tell us about your lifestyle and priorities before you learned the truth?
Well, Brother Kutsoyanis, before I came in the truth, I lived the hippie lifestyle, and my life focused on smoking marijuana, going to pot parties, and going to rock festivals. And then I had a young son at the time, and he was my main priority in life. And even though I had the family that I always wanted, I felt that something was missing in my life, and that life basically had no meaning.
Now, Sister Tillerman, what are your priorities in lifestyle now?
Well, after learning the truth, of course, my lifestyle began to focus around Jehovah. And as I learned about regular pioneering, that became my goal. And after I married Jim, I was able to pioneer for 5 years, but then had to come off the list. But since then, I've been working at increasing my hours and to be able to, once again, regular pioneer.
Very good. Now tell us, how do you feel about the changes you have made?
Well, I have more now. Even though Jim and I have simplified our lives, I feel that I have more now than I could have ever imagined. Jehovah has provided a warm, loving family among his people. I had the privilege of studying with 4 young women who they dedicated their lives to Jehovah and were baptized. And Jim and I lovingly referred to them as our spiritual children. And now I am currently conducting 4 more Bible studies, and I have to say, there's nothing like helping someone learn about Jehovah. And now my life has real meaning.
That's beautiful. Now, Brother Tillerman, can you tell us about your lifestyle and priorities before you learned the truth?
Well, it was a little different than Joanne. Yeah, I just learned some new things about you on that. Well, shortly after I got out of college, I was invited to become an executive officer of a international corporation, and so that afforded me the opportunity to work very hard so I could play hard. I had a beautiful home down in Miami. I had a fishing boat. I had a high-speed boat, fast car, motorcycle. I had everything that my eye could desire.
Wow. Well, obviously you don't have all that now, so what are your priorities in lifestyle now?
Yeah, and unfortunately the Concorde doesn't fly anymore, so I don't get to go to Paris to have French food. But now, since learning about Jehovah and knowing the purpose of why I'm here and the love that Jehovah shows, I've dedicated my life completely to serve him. I love Jehovah intently. I love our territory and the people there, knowing that they really need a Jehovah, especially during these difficult days that we're experiencing now.
And Brother Tillerman, you used to just go for dinner to Paris with the Concorde, but that's not happening anymore, right? Now, how do you feel about the changes you've made, Brother Tillerman?
Well, these changes have really brought meaning to my life. They've brought great happiness. Jehovah's provided me a beautiful wife who loves Jehovah very deeply. We have wonderful, wonderful friends in our congregation, our spiritual family. Serve with elders who love Jehovah intently and who really appreciate the privilege of serving as shepherds to the congregation. But even more than that, Joanne alluded to our spiritual children. And as you might know, Nick, neither one of us have children of our own, but Jehovah has been true to his word. He has given us spiritual daughters and sons. They call us mom and dad. We're intently involved in their life, and we're watching their spiritual progress each and every day, and it's a beautiful, beautiful thing to experience.
And I can tell you, Brother Tillerman, the first time we met as elders to take care of some business, I was so impressed by your love for Jehovah and your devotion, and I'm so happy that you turned your life around and your wife. We thank you both.
Thank you.
Yes, friends, now is the time to keep our focus on what is truly important. Yes, we want to have treasures, but we want to have the right kind of treasures, friends. Let's look at Matthew chapter 6 and see the kind of treasures that we want to store up. In Matthew chapter 6 and verse 19 and 20, Jesus there said, "Stop storing up for yourselves treasures upon the earth, where moth and rust consume and where thieves break in and steal. Rather, store up for yourselves treasures in heaven where neither moth nor rust consumes and where thieves do not break in and steal." And of course, obviously, because where our treasure is, there our heart will be. Yes, friends, one thing is obvious. No treasure, no material thing of this system of things will have any saving power in the great day of God the Almighty at Armageddon. As Zephaniah 1 and verse 18 says, their silver and their gold will not be able to deliver them in the day of Jehovah's fury. The traveling merchants, the advertisement, the phone calls and the mails and everything that you get are going to be gone. We want to make sure that we are not gone, that we stay behind. The Bible here in 1 John chapter 2, if you'd like to turn there to 1 John chapter 2, and we're going to read one verse that shows us what's going to happen to the traveling merchants and everyone who doesn't really come to know Jehovah. At 1 John chapter 2 and verse 17, it says, "Furthermore, the world is passing away, and so is its desire. But he that does the will of God remains forever." So friends, be determined to refuse to allow your mind to be contaminated by the world's satanic scam artists. And if it sounds too good to be true, it is too good to be true. Rather, we want to really place our trust in Jehovah, and the symposium, the talks, this assembly is an expression of Jehovah's love to warn us. Be content with what you have. Don't allow the traveling merchant to cause you to go into debt. And one thing too, friends, refuse to have even an emotional and sympathetic share in politics. New leaders come in, new presidents come in, and they promise the world, and we say, he's a sincere man, I hope he does make it. See, what happened? We're having a sympathetic share. We know that no matter who comes in, it's not going to bring relief. It's God's kingdom, and they do come under the control of what 1 John 5:19 said of the wicked one. So please, stay uncontaminated, and no part of this world. Center your life on the perfect will of God, and you'll remain forever.